This is StoryLink Radio. The professional storytellers at StoryLink Radio have been around for a long time. The Irish knew storytellers by the name Shawnee. We are committed to bringing stories to life through the spoken word, as in traditional oral storytelling. We present stories of many genres: ancient myths and legends, short stories, full-length novels, science fiction, high fantasy, philosophy, traditions, classics, drama, fiction, non-fiction, romance, theater, ghosts and haunts, stories of the strange, and much, much more. Our stories may be drawn from contemporary sources or from some dusty, near-forgotten tome. Regardless, it is a treat like no other to listen to stories and tales presented in a live format with the emotion and feeling a true professional storyteller brings, conjuring up images of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy. So join us at StoryLink Radio and let us be your Shawnee for a time. Our stories are presented before a live audience, then recorded for the StoryLink Radio podcast for your on-demand listening pleasure. Please visit StoryLinkRadio.com for show notes, to find out how to join our live audience, and for lots of free stuff, including free audiobooks and much more. Visit www.storylinkradio.com.
From Guy de Maupassant's Was It a Dream?
I had loved her madly. Why does one love? Why does one love? How queer it is to see only one being in the world, to have only one thought in one's mind, only one desire in the heart, and only one name on the lips, a name which comes up continually, rising like the water in a spring from the depths of the soul to the lips, a name which one repeats over and over again, which one whispers ceaselessly everywhere like a prayer. Yes. I'm going to tell you right now our story. For love only has one, which is always the same. I met her and loved her. That is all. For a whole year I lived on her tenderness, on her caresses, in her arms, in her dresses, on her words, so completely wrapped up, bound, absorbed in everything which came from her, that I no longer cared whether it was day or night, or whether I was dead or alive on this old earth of ours. And then she died. How? I do not know. I no longer know anything. But one evening she came home wet, for it was raining heavily, and the next day she coughed, and she coughed for about a week and took to her bed. Oh, me. What happened I do not remember now. The doctors came, they wrote, went away. Medicines were brought, and some women made her drink them. Her hands were hot, her forehead was burning, her eyes bright and sad, and when I spoke to her she answered me. I do not remember what we said. I've forgotten everything. She died, and I very well remember her slight feeble sigh. The nurse said, "Ah." And I understood, I understood. I know nothing more, nothing. I saw a priest who said, "Your mistress," and it seemed to me as if he were insulting her. As she was dead, nobody had the right to say that any longer. I turned him out. Another came who was very kind and tender. I shed tears when he spoke to me about her. They consulted me about the funeral, but I do not remember anything that they said, though I recollected the coffin and the sound of the hammer when they nailed her down in it. Oh, God, oh, God. She was buried, she, in that hole. Some people came, female friends. I made my escape, and I ran away. I ran, and then I walked through the streets. I went home. The next day I started on a journey. Yesterday, I returned to Paris, and when I saw my room again, our room, our bed, our furniture, everything that remains of the life of a human being after death, I was seized by such a violent attack of fresh grief that I felt like opening the window and throwing myself out into the street. I could not remain any longer among these things, between these walls which had enclosed and sheltered her, which retained 1,000 atoms of her skin, of her breath, in their imperceptible crevices. I took up my hat to make my escape, and just as I reached the door, I passed the large glass in the hall, which she had put there so she might look at herself every day from head to foot as she went out, to see if her toilette looked well, if she was correct and pretty from her little boots to her bonnet. Yes. I stopped short in front of that looking-glass, which she had so often been reflected, so often that it must have retained her reflection. I was standing there, trembling, with my eyes fixed on the glass, on that flat, profound, empty glass, which had contained her entirely and had possessed her as much as as my passionate looks had. I felt as if I loved that glass. I touched it. It was cold. Oh, the recollection, sorrowful mirror, burning mirror, horrible mirror, to make men suffer such torments. Happy is the man whose heart forgets everything that is contained, everything that has passed before it, everything that has looked at itself in it, or has been reflected in its affection, in its love. Oh, how I suffer. I went out without knowing it, without wishing it, toward the cemetery. I found her simple love, her simple grave, a white marble cross with these few words: she loved, was loved, and died. Oh, yes, she is there. She's there, below, decayed. How horrible. I sobbed with my forehead on the ground, and I stopped there for a long time. Then I saw that it was getting dark, and a strange, mad wish, the wish of a despairing lover, seized me. I wished to pass the night, the last night, in weeping on her grave. But I should be seen and driven out. How was I to manage? I was cunning, and I got up and I began to roam about in that city of the dead. I walked and walked. How small this city is in comparison with the city in which we live. And yet, how much more numerous the dead are than the living. We want high houses, wide streets, and much room for our 4 generations who see the daylight at the same time. Drink water from the spring, wine from the vines, and eat bread from the plains. And all for all the generations of the dead. For all that ladder of humanity that has descended down to us, there is scarcely anything. The earth takes them back, and oblivion effaces them. Adieu. At the end of the cemetery, I suddenly perceived that I was in its oldest part. Here, the oldest part of the graveyard, were those who had been dead a long time, mingling with the soil, where the crosses themselves are decayed, where possibly newcomers will be put tomorrow. It is full of untended roses, of strong and dark cypress trees, a sad and beautiful garden nourished on human flesh. I was alone, perfectly alone. So I crouched in a green tree. I hid myself there completely amid the thick and somber branches. I waited, clinging to the stem like a shipwrecked man does to a plank. When it was quite dark, I left my refuge and began to walk softly, slowly, inaudibly, through that ground full of dead people. I wandered about for a long time, but could not find her tomb again. I went on with extended arms, knocking against the tombs with my hands, my feet, my knees, my chest, even with my head, without being able to find her. I groped about like a blind man, finding his way. I felt the stones, the crosses, the iron railings, the metal wreaths, the wreaths of faded flowers. I read the names with my fingers by passing them over the letters. Oh, what a night, what a night! I could not find her again. There was no moon. What a night! I was frightened, horribly frightened, in these narrow paths between 2 rows of graves. Graves, nothing but graves! On my right, on my left, in the front of me, around me, everywhere there were graves. I sat down on one of them, for I could not walk any longer. My knees were so weak. I could hear my heart beat, and I heard something else as well. What? Confused, nameless noise. Was the noise in my head, in the impenetrable night, or beneath the mysterious earth? The earth sown with human corpses. I looked all around me, but I cannot say how long I remained there. I was paralyzed with terror, cold with fright, ready to shout, ready to die. Suddenly it seemed to me that the slab of marble on which I was sitting was moving. Certainly it was moving, as if it were being raised. With a bound I sprang onto the neighboring tomb, and I distinctly saw the stone which I had just quitted rise upright. And then the dead person appeared, a naked skeleton, pushing the stone back with its bent back. I saw it quite clearly, although the night was so dark. On the cross I could read, "Here lays Jacques Olivant, who died at the age of 51. He loved his family, was kind and honorable, and died in the grace of the Lord." The dead man also read what was inscribed on his own tombstone. Then he picked up a stone off the path, a little pointed stone, and began to scrape the letters carefully. He slowly effaced them. With the hollows of his eyes, he looked at the places where they had been engraved. Then with the tip of the bone that had been his forefinger, he wrote in luminous letters, like those lines which boys trace on the walls with the tip of a lucifer match. Here reposes Jacques Ollivant, who died at the age of 51. He hastened his father's death by unkindness. He wished to inherit his fortune. He tortured his wife. He tormented his children. He deceived his neighbors. He robbed everyone he could. And he died wretched. When the skeleton had finished writing, the dead man stood motionless, looking at his work. On turning round, I saw that all the graves were open, and all the dead bodies had emerged from them, that all had effaced the lies inscribed on their gravestones by their relations, substituting the truth instead. Some kind of honesty in grave-making, I suppose. And I saw that all had been tormentors of their neighbors, malicious, dishonest hypocrites, liars, rogues, calumniators, envious, that they had stolen, deceived, performed every disgraceful, every abominable action, these good fathers, these faithful wives, these devoted sons, these chaste daughters, these honest tradesmen, these men and women who were called irreproachable. They were all writing at the same time now, on the threshold of their eternal abode, the truth, the terrible and holy truth of which everybody was ignorant or pretended to be ignorant while they were alive. I thought that she also must have written something on her tombstone, and now running without any fear among the half-open coffins, among the corpses and skeletons, I went toward her, sure that I should find her immediately. I recognized her at once, without seeing her face, which was covered by the winding sheet on the marble cross, where shortly before I had read, She was loved and died. Now I saw, having gone out in the rain one day, in order to deceive her lover, she caught cold and died. It appears that they found me at daybreak, lying on her grave, unconscious. Was it a dream? Thank you for listening to StoryLink Radio. If you like what you've just heard, we hope you will subscribe to our podcast and pass along our web address, www.storylinkradio.com. Be sure to visit our website for show notes, to find out how to join our live audience, and for lots of free stuff, including free audiobooks and much more. Join us next time for another story from StoryLink Radio.